Welcome everyone, I'm Katie from Festival Formula and thank you for joining us to find out more about the short film Ganef. I have with me today a collection of the cast and crew. It's always a great opportunity to be able to find out more about the films and about where they've come from and the process of them. So Mark, can you tell me a bit about how this story came about?
Yeah, it's a very personal film. It comes from my family's experiences. I come from a family of Holocaust survivors. My grandparents on my mum's side came to live in London after the war. They were German, and my grandmother particularly, she lived in hiding throughout the war. And so the world I was brought up in, I was just very aware that a lot of the family I knew had survived this terrible experience, and a lot of the family I didn't know hadn't survived. So I was really, from a very young age, just very aware, just on a very domestic level, that people were missing, and there were people who were living with some, I guess, a lot of baggage. There's obviously been a lot of films about the Holocaust set during the period of the war, but I see less represented the experience of, just on a domestic level, what it was like to start again, and what kinds of sadnesses and paranoias people who had lost everything and been persecuted then just brought into just their ordinary lives when they started up again in new countries. And I was also really aware of how that got passed on to their children and their children's children. So I just wanted to find a story that explored on a micro level how these big situation and these big feelings could just play out around, a mistake over a silver bowl.
With this kind of story coming from a very personal part from you and your family, how long have you sat on this wanting to make this film?
I mean, this is my first original film that I've written and directed, so it's like I was putting on pressure on myself to just get on and write something original, full stop. There was actually a bursary that I applied for that I needed to write something for. I didn't get the bursary, but it forced me to write this film.
And your background's more of a theatre kind of approach. So what would you say is the main difference between the two mediums aside from the live aspect?
Well, I just think you can get really close to people. There's an intimacy to film. There's an intimacy in theatre, but you basically have one locked off wide shot in theatre, that it means it's harder to get right into the moment and the breath and the look and the what isn't said. And with film, so much of the performances that these guys give is when they're not speaking. Of course, all those things are true in theatre, but I just love it. I love the economy of film and the ability to kind of punch into a moment really, really, really quickly.
And did you have any influences for the film? Were you kind of referencing particular color palettes or previous directors or design?
Yeah, we talked a lot about there's a really old film called The Fallen Idol, which is about a little boy who witnesses something in a house, something criminal, and sort of has to reevaluate his relationship with the family butler. And that's an amazing film. And also color-wise, particularly, we talked a lot about Phantom Thread, the Paul Thomas Anderson film, which is very rich and lush, but sort of feels quite modern. And we were just trying to strike a balance between this little girl's point of view that's quite dreamy and rich and of another time, but also feel like we were not making a sort of chocolate box period film.
It's definitely, it's one thing that we've often found people say about Ganef particularly, is that how beautifully it's shot.
Yeah.
It does have that kind of grand kind of feeling to it, even though it is a very short, brief kind of, in and out story, but it lingers.
A bit of a cliche to say these things, but the fourth big character is that house, and how this little girl's relationship with it changes from it being a sort of playground to it being a kind of a place of isolation and fear. So yeah, that we had to really shoot it in an interesting way.
And with that location, was it all one house?
Yeah. One of the massive advantages was that we found the house 4 months before the shoot. So I was then able to go back and rewrite with the house in mind. And then we could build a storyboard from that. And the owner of the house was really cool, and she just let us come in and do lots of more recce's than perhaps you normally get. So we really got to know the place, and we rehearsed there as well the week before with the cast around the kitchen table, and tried a couple of things out before we shot. So we were just so lucky. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Well, it definitely pays off, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
So Izabella, how did you get the part in the film?
I really just forgot.
Do you remember your audition? No?
How old were you when you shot the film, Izabella?
7, and now I'm 8.
You're 8 now?
Yeah.
8.
And when I think we cast you as 6.
I think so.
Yeah. And your first audition, I think you did on a tape, didn't you? Yeah, and then you came to a group audition, I think. You came and I first met you in person. You were with a bunch of other girls. And I think you did some improvising, didn't you?
I think so.
Do you remember anything about that?
I remember running around or something.
Yeah. Were you scared at all? Were you nervous?
No, not really.
Then at the end, you did an hour with us on your own, and you did loads of like dancing and improvising, and you'd read some scenes, and we have loads of footage of you doing stuff. And you, I remember at the end of your audition, we were all just out of breath and on the floor because you had just made us do loads of dancing, and all the games that we made you do, you made us do. So you were. It was very fun.
Yeah.
Do you not remember any of it?
And you've done lots of modelling in adverts. This is very different from doing a photo shoot.
Yes,
So
very different.
And how is it very different?
It's because like you spend more days on it. And like it's not you taking photos, it's like taking videos basically.
And did you find it really hard to remember your lines? Or was that something that you could do?
Medium.
Medium hard.
Yeah.
Did you need a little bit of help?
Yeah, mostly.
I don't remember you needing any help.
She was amazing, and you knew the
Yeah.
song off by heart. You knew that song in Hebrew. You learned it all way before we.
That was incredible. I remember that. We were all like,
Oh yeah, I remember singing the Hebrew song.
Have you forgotten it now? I guess.
Yeah.
What do you remember? Do you have any fun memories from this film?
The first day when I met all of you.
Oh,
And then I remember on the last day when I had to go home, I cried because I didn't want to go home.
You had so much fun on the set, and everyone loved you, and you were just running. You were just so excited to be there.
Yeah.
And also, you're funny because you're very kind of like mischievous and like you are now, and playful and fun, but you're also very, very professional and very, very focused, aren't you? You're really, really good at just being little Ruthie in that moment.
did you find it odd having a camera person really, really close to you? Is that a bit weird?
Yeah, because they were like this. And then I was like, why are you so close to me?
Okay, so Lydia, we're going to come to you next. So what drew you to this project?
I loved it when I read Mark's script. I think it's like carrying on from what Mark said at the beginning, that often Holocaust and it was all portrayed in terms of the sort of journey of surviving it, as if that's the end point. And I really loved that this was a film that was kind of subverting that narrative and saying what happens then afterwards.
And actually kind of looking at it from a different perspective. But actually, you're right, to put it into more of a modern day setting is a bit of a jolt, because you do kind of go, actually, yeah, no, these stories don't end. It's they're a story that carries on through generations. Lydia, if you can tell us a bit about how you researched and prepared for the part, because I understand that you listened to some of Mark's grandma talking.
Yeah, it's Mark's family. Like, he has photographs and he had this amazing recording with her. And I really loved your sort of note. You were like, when you sent it to me, you pointed out that she was being interviewed, and so she was in sort of public mode in a way. And it was really interesting, like bearing that in mind, to listening to her, like all the layers of I don't know, performance or how you speak about this unspeakable thing. But yeah, I just listened to that loads and loads and loads.
My grandmother's being interviewed for the Imperial War Museum for their archives, and she was very nervous, I think. And I think what that revealed as well, which is a part of what I think Lydia brings out brilliantly, is like at this point in time, like things like Schindler's List had not come out in the cinema. People, they didn't think that this was really worthy of being talked about, and they didn't really talk about what they'd been through. So it was like at that time in the 60s, it was shameful what they'd been through, and husbands and wives didn't really talk about it to each other. So I think what you witnessed was like my grandmother at a point in her life where she was just beginning to really talk about it.
How did you prepare outside of kind of like listening to Mark's grandma? Did you kind of do any extra research that you probably wouldn't have done for another film, perhaps?
I think the biggest like resource was talking to Mark about it, and I loved in the script how his understanding of kind of how people might carry trauma when it's not been processed, like her headaches, and so being quite specific about what she felt, and her sleeping in the middle of the day, and her love of like luxurious things, ways of escaping maybe, or managing something that you haven't processed yet. And so I guess I was throwing myself into like those things, like the sort of things that are symptomatic of having been through what she's been through. And yeah, and then just, I mean, I didn't have to do anything because Izabella was so great, and we just just look in your eyes and hang out with you. But it was hard actually because she's so lovely and you want to hang out, but having to put a barrier in a way because of Mrs. Hurth's managing and how that affects her ability to relate in the present tense with this like very present character that Izabella was playing.
You make the filming process sound really nice and less stressful than other people do. So Sophie, tell us how you came to be involved in this film.
I'm going to do an Izabella here. Izabella, it is really hard to remember, isn't it? I think Mark email me or something. I can't remember, but I got the script and I just really loved it. Like same as Lydia, it's this really simple sort of way of telling, like you're saying, telling this huge story. And I just wanted to do it.
Yeah. So from your character perspective, how much do you think Lynn understood about Mrs. Hurth's past?
I sort of imagine she didn't understand very much, and it sort of probably wasn't a time they would never have spoken to each other if people weren't even speaking to their husbands, wives, siblings about this stuff. She definitely wasn't speaking to the cleaner. I mean, I imagine she sort of knows there's something going on with her, and she's kind of got a sort of depression by the way she goes to sleep and stuff, but there doesn't seem to be, it's almost like she doesn't lean in to find out too much. And that's really interesting because none of that's sort of there. You're sort of trying to work that out, and you never really know how much Lynn gets of what Mrs. Hurth's been through.
I think what's quite a whirlwind with this particular narrative is because the relationship between Lynn and Ruthie is on such a personable, warm, engaging level that is such a contrast to the mother, and it's wonderfully set up at the beginning. And as your character, Sophie, the relationship begins to morph into something different because of perceived notions of what's happened and everything else. Did you find, like, how did you approach that with your character decisions? Because obviously you're almost playing two timelines of what's happened.
With the story, there was like this sort of sense that Lynn and Ruthie were losing their innocence kind of at the same time, even though she's the child and I wasn't. Because in some ways Lynn's a bit childlike, a bit, they sort of have this fallout in a weird way. And everyone just wants it to go back to the beginning, but it can't. It never can. And so I really liked that sort of loss of innocence, but through this sort of tiny moment of her seeing this thing and thinking it was what it was. And
just going back to the beginning of the film, because it's quite an energetic kind of just drops you in, and it's got that very kind of like brilliantly childlike kind of element of play in it. That kind of statue game, was that written into the script?
Definitely really scripted, wasn't it, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was.
Because I
Yeah. It
was
was.
how am I going to do this? What do you want me to do?
Oh yeah, I was a bit where I was trying to make you be. I was trying to do like hit this statue stuff, and you were like, "Yeah, I'll just try my version of it, thanks." Actually, there is one bit which is all improvised, which is when Izabella was just like mucking about. Like, so the stuff with the chandelier when she's spinning, that was all written, but we then had a thought of just let it, because Izabella, as you can tell, has got a lot of energy and is very playful and inventive. Here she goes. So we just thank you for demonstrating that. So I just thought it'd be fun to get her to muck about in front of the camera, and we just recorded lots of her just dancing and gurgling and singing and playing with objects and messing around. And we then cut that in. We intercut that into the scripted sequence to give it a bit more of a kinetic energy at the beginning, and almost like she was like busting to get out of the frame. And yeah, Izabella did a brilliant job with that. Do you remember any of that? Do you remember?
I remember all of it.
Oh yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's all coming back.
Still coming back.
The house is that kind of magical house that you do kind of want to play in, and it was really fun for us to sort of skid about and like run around and check. It's just that it's got that kind of feel to it. That house is perfect location.
I'm going to ask you one last question now, all of you. I want you to think of one word that you want the audience to feel after they've finished watching Ganef.
It's one of those films that stays with you and you think about, and little images from it stay with you and spiral onto things. I'm trying to think of someone else. Go. I've not got a word.
Lydia has to have a good word.
Lydia, you got this. I know you.
I liked what you said. It's true. It is a really thoughtful thing. Even talking about it now, it's such a. As you could just unpack so much.
It's very moving as well, but it does it in. It's sort of all threaded, all layers, isn't it? And something. I think something would hit someone that wouldn't hit the other person. You could watch it loads of times, and that it's got lots of layers. And
I think layers is the word.
layers. You want them to feel layers.
Feel layers.
Yeah, well, like I hope intrigued and maybe unsettled. There's like it's deliberately ambiguous at the end as well. I'm sorry, I'm not. It's not doing one word.
We've been really.
I said it was a tough one. I did say it was
You know what
a tough
popped
one.
in my head was childhood. I'd done that, so that's my word for it.
Yeah. Well, I said like it just makes you want to be a child again. Just having that. What the film's very good at is taking that moment of when childhood does slightly become tainted by reality.
Yeah.
That you suddenly give credence to something that you've never thought of as a child. So your only way to kind of decipher it is good and bad. But no, that makes sense. Childhood makes absolute sense.
Izabella, did you feel watching it for the first time?
I was like embarrassed because I was like seeing myself on camera and I was like, oh my goodness, that's
Okay. Embarrassed.
I think you've all shared some wonderful kind of insight into the creative process, and I want to thank all of you so much. I think Izabella, you brought energy for all of us and plenty to spare, which is great. And I want to thank you all for sharing your stories and ideas about Ganef.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, guys. I'll take that. I'll edit that.